Welcome everyone. Those stories in just a moment, but we first start in India, where the search for suspected militants continues now on Wednesday in the town of Uri in Jammu and Kashmir. This a day after security forces foiled 2 infiltration bids and killed 10 militants in a gunfight. 1 Indian Army soldier was also killed in that operation. India's army fought 2 groups of suspected militants trying to cross the line of control with Pakistan and Kashmir on Tuesday. Now, the flare-up in violence comes after India blamed Pakistan for the recent attack where 18 soldiers were killed. This all happening, of course, this weekend at a brigade headquarters in that town. It's about 100 kilometers west of the town of Srinagar, the summer capital. Now, meanwhile, a security blanket continues to envelope the area of Srinagar in Jammu and Kashmir. The curfew is now in force for some parts of the area. Normal life there will still be affected for the 75th straight day in the valley. More than 80 people have so far been killed in those protests, all sorts of clashes. All of this, of course, erupting after Indian security forces killed a Kashmiri militant earlier on this year. Well, cornered over terrorism, Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif has raised this issue about Kashmir during his recent trip to New York for the United Nations meet. Now, Sharif is expected to address the session later on Wednesday evening. So, of course, we'll have updates on that when we hear from him. But in addition to this, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has also asked Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to prevent terrorists from using Pakistan as a safe haven, as a breeding ground of sorts. Meanwhile, there is also a bipartisan group of 2 powerful American lawmakers who have introduced an act in the U.S. House of Representatives, this to designate Pakistan as a state of sponsored terrorism.
The focus of the General Assembly on this critical agenda. Of course, control.
All right, well, certainly our big story that we're all talking about. We've been covering this wall to wall since all of this broke this weekend. So we're going to go to some guests now to get a little bit more perspective on the story. We first start with Mr. Rahul Jalali. He's a senior journalist and expert with what's going on in Kashmir. Let's start with you first to talk about this issue going on in the valley. Now, we've seen the forces, Pakistan, sort of on the forefront here, having to respond, denying any allegations, but this situation is just getting from bad to worse. Bring us up to speed at this point, what needs to happen between the 2 countries?
Oh, well, what needs to happen, it's happening. The Indian representatives are in the United States. There is a UN General Assembly which is in session. Nawaz Sharif is going to speak there tonight. We are posturing and putting a push towards a policy to declare Pakistan a terror state. I think 2 main prongs of this would be, we've enlisted Afghanistan and Bangladesh to speak in consonance with us as far as terrorism in Pakistan is concerned. You see the result, they're not attending SAARC.
Right.
Secondly, I think the evidence which we've been given to Pakistan till now, and Pakistan hasn't responded, will be placed before the General Assembly to hammer home the point that Pakistan is the epicenter of terrorism in the world. And I think that would be a major push, and you see the 2 American senators who are raising or introducing a bill in the US Congress where they want to declare Pakistan a state sponsor of terrorism, which is a big thing because that would lead on to sanctions, etc. That becomes a major problem for Pakistan, and I have a feeling that probably Nawaz Sharif would be ruining the day when he decided to approach Kashmir in the UN General Assembly, because Kashmir has gone onto the back burner. What's up front is the issue of terror.
Terror, specifically in Pakistan.
That's what the General Assembly is debating about. Look at the kind of condemnation which has come worldwide. You have Germany condemning it. You have the Russians talking about it. You have Chinese, including Chinese, who are Pakistan's
Which
friends.
is a little surprising.
Well, no, I think China itself is bothered by terrorism which comes from Pakistan, so I would not. When it comes to the question of terrorism, I wouldn't be surprised. But there is one crucial issue, and I interject this but. Most of the debate has been on what retribution do we talk about when it comes to Pakistan, when it comes to Uri. But I think after the number of people who have been the terrorists, who have been struck down, 10, the number is 10. I think we've got to look at our internal security also. The fact that this could happen in Uri, which is brigade headquarters, which they could go in after the defense minister had talked of peripheral protection post Pathankot, I think a serious review also needs to be done about internal security. We don't need to be complacent there.
Let's stay on that topic and jump to our chief domestic correspondent, Karthikeya Sharma, to give some perspective about specifically security when it comes to some of our armed forces. We've seen this, now 18 soldiers, that is the death toll from this weekend's attack. Still a lot of the ongoing violence. There were 10 more terrorists have been killed. Karthikeya, let me ask you now, can you bring us up to pressure about what India is going to have to do to get some of these situations sorted out when it comes to security of their armed men and women in the military?
See, I really don't expect any exceptional or any strong military maneuver by the Indian government. We didn't do it after 26/11. This does not match anywhere near the scale of what happened that day. In one day, hundreds of people lost lives.
Right.
There was mayhem on the streets of Mumbai. This is not like that. Only thing which is different past 1 year is that they are trying to attack important military installations like Pathankot. They went to the DG's headquarters in Poonch, then the attack in Hardwara, the attack in Uri. These are important places. But I think one has to understand that why Pathankot? Because Pathankot is housing those helicopters, armed helicopters, which will be delivering them to Afghanistan. So for Pakistan also, they think that we are crossing a red line by really arming the Afghan government to teeth. But the larger question is that what do we need to do, because the domestic constituency is completely riled up by the discourse of 2014 elections. I think what India needs is a sort of a political consensus which exists in Israel, which is government or no government or A government or B government or C government. There are agencies who get the mandate to go after people who stand against the interest of the country, in that case the interest of Israel.
Right.
I really don't want to get into those details, but there are agencies who pinpoint, target and ensure they are not there. See, what is the biggest inability of the Indian government? Syed Salahuddin is still there. The people who are part of the Kandahar hijacking are still there. They were released from the Indian jails. So to say that we have war, no, that's really against civil society. We must have the potential to hit them where it hurts.
And speaking of that, tonight we expect to hear from Pakistan, who basically denied any kind of allegations with regards to this attack, basically saying India needs to do more, show concrete evidence that Pakistan was responsible, but perhaps this could be a move that the global community is sort of stepping in and isolating Pakistan, using Pakistan, saying they're going to be a haven for terrorism. Let's talk a little bit about that. What do we expect Mr. Nawaz Sharif to address? He's already dodged questions at the UN Assembly. Do we expect him to say anything that's surprising at this point?
No, I don't think so, because he will stick to his script, and the script is Kashmir. They have announced it. He's been sending delegations of MPs,
right.
20 MPs touring the world to sensitize the world about Kashmir, though he's not succeeded, because these 20 MPs, if you look at what Pakistani press talked about them, was that this is more a pleasure trip by these 20 MPs rather than hammering home
solving the issue.
That's right. That's what press in Pakistan went to town about. Secondly, I don't think what Nawaz Sharif doesn't know what to say but Kashmir, because he's on the back foot as far as terrorism is concerned. Look, John Kerry gave him virtually a dressing down on Kashmir. He must be hearing from a lot of other people about Kashmir.
But Rahul, there is an issue here. The sort of backing which Pakistan gets from a rising power called China is something which India has never received either from the United States of America or from Soviet Union.
Right.
Only when situations like this happen.
And then China is transforming the economy of Pakistan by investing $46 billion. So when people say that China will be perturbed, the only thing that China will be perturbed about, why jeopardize a project of $46 billion?
So purely an economic interest.
For China, it's purely economics. For China,
also,
the money
also
matters.
understand, because India has raised the question of Gilgit-Baltistan. Now their entire CPEC corridor runs through Gilgit-Baltistan now, and that is Gwadar Port. The entry for China onto the water, an entry onto a port.
A portway.
That goes through Gilgit-Baltistan. We've raised that question. China also would not like to jeopardize that. Gilgit-Baltistan is not an easy situation today.
Go ahead.
So their invite to India to participate in CPEC.
There is one difference between India and Pakistan specifically, and even we can count China. There are policies which are consistent despite political changes, whether it's Nawaz Sharif, whether it's Bhutto, whether it's Zardari. The army there can take the call that in order to protect our deep strategic reserve in Afghanistan, I'm going to hit at India.
Right.
The same thing can happens with China. They will cross the border, perturb the area, and come back. But in our case, we do not have or we never had the governments which had created consensus vis-a-vis policy against terror.
Exactly.
And I think
because
that's where
you know,
Indian foreign policy fails.
What's
you
wrong?
see,
Go ahead.
this is exactly it. He's right. We don't even have a single government which has the same policy running over a year.
Right.
They chop and change. I mean, look at this government, from friendship to war to friendship to war. I think today we need to have a long-term policy in place. One, if we are talking Balochistan, let's not talk about it. Let's do something on the ground. Where are our boots on the ground?
Right.
Do we have them? I mean, this is only Indira Gandhi's time when Pakistan used to fear about RAW. They still have shudders about RAW, and that goes then. RAW doesn't exist the same way as it did then. That's one. Secondly, I think it is high time where the ruling party has a plan in place,
Right.
and then on that plan, call an all-party meeting to build a political consensus within this country on what they want to do with Pakistan. I think that an all-party meeting could be called in Kashmir. I see no reason why it can't be called on terrorism and Pakistan.
And responsibility that the war hysteria should die down.
Exactly.
We're going to take a quick pause now and jump into our correspondent in London, Mandy Clark. Thanks so much for joining us, Mandy. A heated discussion about what is going on. We're going to be having to hear from Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in just a few hours, addressing world leaders at the UN Assembly. Do we have any sense of what is expected to come from either him or as well as other leaders reacting to this? We do know that many nations, including America, we've heard from Afghanistan, Russia, all siding with India at this point, even isolating Pakistan. So do we expect him to sort of say something to change their perspective? What can we expect, Mandy?
I think we can expect, as your guests were saying, he's not going to go off the narrative. He's going to address Kashmir, but he's going to address Kashmir looking at the 2 months of violence, not specifically the attack. I think for Pakistan has been disappointing because they certainly came with the expectation that they would get international backing on the Kashmir issue. Even when Ban Ki-moon addressed the opening assembly, he didn't touch on Kashmir or on the issue, and that was really part of Pakistan's plan to get international support. Of course, this attack and terrorism is a global issue. Everybody's worried about it. The suggestion that Pakistan is behind this attack and it's state-sponsored terror, that's certainly going to lose a lot of the support from the international community.
And what about the economic impact? We'll bring it back to our guest, right now in studio. Economic impact. We talked about China. We talked about, some of these other players. Do they have a vested interest to worry about their own economic interest as opposed to the global end for terrorism? Karthikeya, I don't know if you want to tackle that. You talked about China specifically earlier on. Do certain countries like China, you mentioned, have more of a vested interest to deal with their own economy than tackle terrorism head on?
China is the new colonial power. It doesn't care about whether the ethics in terms of democracy exists in a country or not. That is why China has been able to do business with countries with which India cannot do. China is in business with North Korea. China is in business with Pakistan. China is in business with all the Central Asian despotic regimes. China is in business with West Africa. It's the biggest colonial power. It's the biggest landowner. So it's the biggest landowner in Myanmar also with the junta there. So China and India are two different setups.
Right.
Like Archit, when I went to China, the common question which was asked to me was, we can do business, but why can't people do business in India? I said, because we have democracy, and democracy also creates opposition for projects. It was very difficult for me to explain it to the students in Xi'an University. We thought business means that, you get the government to write a piece on paper.
And you're done.
And you are done.
Right.
But it's not done like that. So there is a cultural difference also which exists between two countries. Maybe they have been able to do business in Pakistan. There's no democracy in Balochistan. There's no agitation over land acquisition. You do that in India, you'll have an agitation within 24 hours.
Right. Speaking of Balochistan, that's a great segue to talking about this issue. Balochistan, obviously now, the people of Balochistan certainly want to, I wouldn't say capitalize, but use this as an opportunity to talk about their struggles and situation. We've heard from Modi, during his Independence Day speech, saying that Balochistan needs to have its own freedom.
Well,
where do we stand on the Balochistan issue with regards to all of this that's happening?
This is what I said earlier. We need to have boots on the ground. Do we have that? I mean, yes, we're talking of Balochistan.
Right.
Mukti's grandson is going to be provided
asylum
here.
Sure.
All that is fine. But do we have boots on the ground there? Because if we have boots on the ground, China gets worried. because Gwadar port, if you remember, is in Balochistan,
Right.
is in their territory.
So it's in their own vested interest.
Exactly.
Right.
So China would not like if we raise the question of Balochistan often. And look at what is happening in Balochistan. One of the points of Baluchi agitation is the creation of Gwadar port. They are protesting because Pakistan and Chinese have brought in their own labor
Right.
to run the port and to this is what Chinese style is worldwide. They bring in Chinese labor to do their projects. It's happened in Africa, it's happened everywhere.
Right.
It's the same thing is happening in Gwadar. Local people have lost land, not been compensated. Local people don't get any jobs which they were promised. So this is also one of the causes which is fueling the agitation in Balochistan.
But is it bad timing, though? Is it bad timing right now to deal with this, or is it the sort of the perfect storm for that? It almost seems like, how many things is India going to tackle at this point, dealing with Pakistan? Then you have, it's like they have a lot of things on their plate already.
See, I don't think we're dealing with China. We're dealing with Pakistan when it comes to Balochistan. But Chinese interests do get involved.
Sure.
And look, this is something which we cannot get out of. After Prime Minister's speech on August 15, you can't just leave the Baluchis. So we've got to go ahead with it.
And when Prime Minister had made a specific paradigm shift, China had always opposed sale of BrahMos to Vietnam.
To Vietnam. Yes.
Always.
Yes.
Every Chinese premier. And this time, this government has supplied them BrahMos. So it's not
Yes.
one way, you know.
Yes.
We have also changed certain paradigms in the region, and China is investing more and more in Pakistan.
And Mandy, let's get your perspective as well. We certainly want your input as well. I know you actually spoke to a Baloch, a member earlier on. You got an exclusive interview. We're talking about the Balochistan issue. Is that just a great time for India to address that issue in Balochistan right now? Or is this just too many situations, too many things on India's plate to focus in on when specifically dealing with terrorism?
From a global and international perspective, Balochistan is something that doesn't really register here. So when it becomes an international message from India, I think Balochistan won't hit the mark as much as it would have maybe if it was a couple weeks back before.
Right.
Before it all kicked off. So I think it has to be one voice, one message, one issue. And India's strongest suit in a power play would be tackling terrorism within Pakistan, specifically looking at this attack. And if they can directly link it to the state, then they can effectively isolate the Pakistani state.
All right, certainly a lot of different topics on the agenda. Of course, we're going to wait and watch what exactly Pakistan's Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif will update us. Mandy, thank you so much for your update. Also, thank you to our studio guests for this discussion.